Chapter 1. The Road of Ash and Silence. The road was hardly a road anymore, just a pair of faded ruts where other lives had once moved west. By late autumn it had turned gray, not with snow, not yet, but with a fine residue of dust and distant burnings that the wind carried across the plains and laid down without preference. It dulled the grasses and softened the edges of stone. By afternoon it worked its way onto everything. The folds of cloth, the corners of the eyes, until even the air tasted faintly of ash. He had been writing since dawn. The sky held a flat medicinal blue that offered no heat. Along the ridge, the oaks stood stripped and skeletal, their branches tangled together like the ribs of some long-dead animal beneath the soil. They didn't rustle when the gusts hit. They clicked, a dry, rhythmic sound of bone on bone that followed him for miles. The hooves of his horse struck the ground too lightly in that wide emptiness. Each step landed with a flat thud that seemed to echo farther than it should have. There were no farms nearby, no chimney smoke, no distant voices drifting across the fields. The frontier spread outward in uneven fields, broken only by low hills that revealed nothing new beyond them except more land and more sky. He adjusted the collar of his coat against the cold. His name was Reverend Elias Harrow, though no one had spoken it aloud since his journey began. A Bible rested in his satchel, pressed flat beneath a folded shirt and a small parcel of bread wrapped in cloth. The leather cover was worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. He had not opened it since leaving town. The weight of it felt different now. Not lighter, not heavier, but altered in some way he could not name. The wind shifted, pushing a scatter of dead leaves across the road ahead of him. They skittered and tumbled before dissolving into a ditch. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The words rose without invitation. Ecclesiastes had never been a favorite text. He had preached from it sparingly, careful to frame its bleakness inside reassurance. The congregation preferred certainty, and so had he. Everything is vapor, a chasing after wind. He tightened his jaw and tried to push the thought aside, but it lingered, clinging as persistently as the ash on his coat. There had been a time, not long ago, when he would have corrected himself for dwelling there. Scripture, properly handled, led to order. God was not the author of confusion. The righteous did not escape suffering, but suffering bent toward purpose. Obedience aligned a life with something larger than chance. He had believed that, not crudely, not as a bargain struck with heaven, but as structure beneath the visible world, as if something beneath the world kept it from coming apart. The world no longer felt held. By midday, he dismounted beside a narrow creek that ran shallow over smooth stones. The water moved without urgency, whispering along its own edges. A thin sheet of ice clung to the shaded bank. He tied the horse loosely to a low branch and crouched near the water. Cold seeped immediately through the knees of his trousers, but he did not rise. For several moments he listened. Water, wind, nothing else. He removed his gloves and pressed his hands together. The posture came from habit more than intention. Father, he began. The words felt worn smooth from repetition. Our Father who art in heaven. He paused and looked upward. The sky was vast and unbroken, a seamless dome without seam or opening. Hallowed be thy name. The phrase left his mouth and seemed to thin as it rose, dissolving into the open air before it could gather weight. He waited for something, not a voice, not even a sign, but a shift within himself. A warmth in the chest, a softening, some indication that he had not spoken into vacancy. The creek continued its patient murmur. He swallowed. Why? The word slipped free before he could reshape it into something more proper. It startled him. He had asked questions in sermons before, rhetorical and confident, already armed with answers. This one felt exposed. He listened for a response and heard only the blood moving in his ears. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It did not press or throb. It simply existed. immense and without center. He closed his eyes. He could still remember the way she laughed when the rain struck the roof of the parsonage. The room returned to him as it always did when he now thought of her, not as it had been in health, with lamplight and the quiet rhythm of shared evenings, but at the end. The basin overturned, the midwife's hands red to the wrist, the sheets soaked dark. His wife's face had been so pale it seemed drained of the whole world entirely. Her hair plastered against her temples. She had been breathing in shallow, desperate pulls, each one thinner than the last. He remembered the way her fingers had searched blindly for his hand. The child had not cried. That silence had been the first. They had kept him from the bed at first. They said he would only make it worse. They said she needed calm. By the time they stepped aside, there had been nothing left to disturb. For one forbidden instant before the prayer returned to his lips, he had felt something colder than grief, something closer to betrayal. He had buried the thought as quickly as it came, but the memory of it followed him down the road like a shadow that refused to fall behind. He had taken her hand then. It was already cooling, the warmth leaving in increments too small to measure. He had prayed in that room, not as a pastor assembling doctrine, but as a husband bargaining against inevitability. "Take me instead," he had meant it. The words had come from somewhere beneath theology, beneath pride, beneath fear. They had felt true in a way nothing else had. The ceiling had remained whole. The air had remained ordinary. Her chest had not risen again. The child had lain beside her, small and impossibly still. He opened his eyes beside the creek, the present returning with the same quiet indifference the world had shown him that night. "This is a test," he murmured, though he no longer knew whether he believed in the one who administered it. The wind rose, carrying with it the faint scent of distant smoke. He turned his head. At the far edge of the trees something seemed to shift, a darker line against shadow, a movement too deliberate to be entirely wind. His pulse quickened before reason caught up with it. He rose slowly. The branches swayed, nothing more. Grief had altered his senses before. He told himself this was the same. Yet a peculiar awareness lingered, as though the question he had spoken into the air had not vanished but been received. He untied the horse and placed his boot in the stirrup. Before mounting, he looked once more at the creek. It didn't slow for his need. It just kept tripping over the same stones, cold and mindless. He had told the congregation he was riding toward a new calling, that God had opened another door. The language had come easily. But as he settled into the saddle, he wondered whether he was riding toward purpose at all, or simply away from a grave he could not bear to pass each morning. He had left before dawn 2 days earlier and had not visited her stone. He told himself it was because he could not endure the sight. Another thought had followed him down the road, quiet and unwelcome. What if she was nowhere beneath it? What if earth, flesh, and memory were all that remained? The idea had once felt like blasphemy. Now it pressed closer, not as defiance but as possibility. He reached for his left hand without thinking. The wedding ring nested where it always had. He turned it slowly, feeling the faint indentation it had worn into his skin over years. It no longer felt ornamental. It felt like evidence, proof that something had once held. He wondered how long before even that felt insubstantial. The afternoon stretched across the fields, pulling his shadow thin beside him. As the sun lowered, the air cooled further, and the scent of ash deepened. He did not look back. But as the sky shifted toward evening, he could not escape the impression that the silence he had spoken into beside the creek had not been empty. It had been listening.